Yes, we wanted to make our audio recording really crisp, and so we invested 900 kroner into this amazing device from Rema 1000. And then we were really hyped to come here and record with this microphone. And then we just opened it. Will it work? Oh, I have to be really careful with it, right? And then we opened it and we were like, God damn, look at this nice package, and I wonder what is inside. A fuckhole. there's no microphone in here. So this is an anti-advertisement to Rema 1000, but yeah, their hummus also sucks. Everything else is pretty nice, actually, not gonna lie. Yeah. But yes, today we have Luke and Espen. Actually, the talks are kind of almost synced. We have Luke, who's going to talk about the potential of AI and how it can be like harmful and, well, actually disruptive, and then disruptive can both mean good and bad things. And then we have Espen, who's going to talk about how do we control, if you can even call that, control AI to work in our benefit. A bit egoistic, but hey, well. We're not going to clap the second time. But so everyone that's here, know that that's what happens to you next time you come here. Well, without further ado, I present to you Luke Ring. Give him a round of applause and let's start. And after this talk, there's going to be a little toast session here. We forgot to buy butter. But if there's some volunteer that wants to make this milk into butter during the duration of the talk, please be my guest. Otherwise, the stage is yours, Luke.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. It's nice to see a lot of people here. I was going to just briefly introduce myself for those of you that don't know. I'm currently doing my final year of the CogTalk Bachelor, and I was a software developer for like 100 years, and I'm also a dad, which turns out to be more relevant than you'd expect for a lot of this stuff, because you get to see a lot of the theory put into practice, especially with developmental psychology. I have a few hobbies, especially with like music and photography, which are all kind of related to this central theme of this AI art stuff. And I have always had a bit of a hacker mindset, so if there's something that can be broken, I'll try and break it and then maybe put it back together again. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not. Right, so the main sort of overarching goal, I guess, that I want to do is show you some of the applications around AI-based art. I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with quite a few of them. But hopefully we can get some different angles in here that you might not have thought of, or some ideas that you want to try out yourself. It's not going to be a deep dive. I will briefly explain how these things work underneath, but of course there's plenty of people that are more than willing to explain if you want to learn further about that, and there's tons of resources online as well. I'm focused mainly on visual media. I do have one short hopefully simple audio clip that I want to play, and a couple of like clips from YouTube, but just like some snippets. So I tested the sound before, it was working, so hopefully it continues to do so. But that was the main reasoning for that, because it's much easier to show something visually on the screen. And a bit of a discussion about the philosophy and ethics, but I think Espen will probably dive into that even more than I do. So I guess we could start with talking about like what art is. I mean, it's pretty hard to define. I think you could ask a bunch of different people and have different definitions of it. But there seems to be kind of like a core idea that you're trying to convey something. Maybe a message, it could be political, it could be just emotional, it could be trying to capture a moment in time. And of course there's the aesthetic element to it. People have to find it pleasing and enjoyable to look at. And traditionally it is considered the exclusive domain of humans. If you think of any depictions you've seen of like robots making art or anything like that, it's always, it's kind of mechanical, it's not, it doesn't have feeling and emotion to it. And that seems to be the kind of one of the core principles of something being considered art. And then I put this point here because I think it's important to think about it a little bit. It's like art about the artists themselves and the process they went through, or is it the person that's actually experiencing it? Because if you are shown a bunch of different beautiful paintings and photographs or listen to a beautiful music composition, I guess most of the time you're not thinking who did this. I mean, if you're really into it, then you might actually look it up and try to find more like that. But in general, you're not thinking, how was this made? What did they do? How many hours were they like not eating to finish this piece of art? That kind of thing. So to tie it with AI and automation more broadly, it is one of these things where we already have seen jobs and positions that were filled by humans being replaced by this. I mean, the more recent things with self-driving cars, you can imagine that a lot of this need for a human driver is going to go away eventually. But even in factories and all kinds of things like that, people are getting replaced. It's not necessarily that overall there's not stuff for humans to do, but there are people that are getting displaced and replaced with their certain positions. So I just wanted to go through a couple of brief examples that I saw recently in the media. One of them is, from Star Wars, the voice of Darth Vader, classic, iconic, everyone knows it, if you've ever seen Star Wars. Then now he's going to be replaced by an AI-generated voice, which is kind of funny. I made my own version of what this might sound like here.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
You don't know the power of the dark side. I must obey my master.
So it probably is going to be something like that, I imagine. At least with the money of Disney behind it. And so also I wanted to show another example which I thought was absolutely amazing, that an AI-generated piece of art won a fine art competition. And I mean, if you look at it, it is actually a really nice composition. It's great, and there's no reason that I would look at that and say that's not art. But of course, you can imagine it sparked a huge debate. I mean, no one was there doing any brushstrokes or anything involved like that. But the person who made it did apparently spend many, many hours trying different things and crafting different prompts that might come up with the results that he's looking for, and something that to him is considered like a acceptable and pleasing result. I don't know, I think in my opinion I would consider that art, but of course there's tons of disagreement about that, and so it's one of these things that I think is just going to become more and more prevalent as you see more of these works of art, because people can throw things around on the internet without attribution, and some of them may be painstaking work from a human, and other ones might be generated from a neural network, and how are you going to tell the difference? And I think it's worth also exploring a couple of things from the past, because we do see these things happening from time to time where there's new technology and people push back on it, and we don't like new things in general as like a species. It can be a bit scary. We're worried about the implications of it, and there are legitimate concerns with most new technologies, and this is no different. But in general, we are able to kind of overcome this and adapt to it and include it in our lives. So the first, I just wanted to go through like visual media. It's only a very quick overview, but one thing was with photography, it was around since the early 1800s, but the technology was obviously slow and not that great. The quality of the images was terrible. It slowly started getting better, and then of course later on you get color and things like that. But there was this quote that I thought was great. It's, the fear has sometimes been expressed that photography would in time entirely supersede the art of painting. And I think in some cases it probably has, but there's still people that do painting, and there's still amazing works of art on canvas as well. But this was from 1901, so you can see that concern has been around for a while. And then the same thing with photography, because we had cameras, which are expensive, especially good quality ones and lenses and all that kind of thing, as the manufacturing processes got better and the technology improved, these things got smaller, easier to access for just everyday people. And then, of course, after that, the digital cameras, and then phones, which now have amazing cameras in them, and you can take incredible pictures. And some professionals are adapting to this. I saw like a article about, I think it was 800 or something professional photographers were surveyed, and within the last couple of years, their usage of phones for actually making photos has gone up to from 0 to 11% or something. So it's not like it's completely adopted, but because the quality is getting better and better, it does offer the potential for people to use it in a professional setting as well. But of course, there are more things involved than just getting a phone and taking a photo. It helps that it can make it really nice just from one press of a button, but there are things to take into consideration: the composition and lighting and how you want the mood of the picture to be and what elements are important and things. But yeah, at the end of the day, it is in everyone's pocket now. Everyone has a decent camera. So yeah, I mean, the argument may not be old, but there is something that feels a little bit different, and maybe it'll pan out to be not any different. But there is a big impact to this AI-generated art, and all of the implications, the applications that I'll run you through in this talk, are just kind of scratching the surface of what I think is possible with this technology. We're just starting. A lot of it's new. I mean, a lot of papers have come out in the last couple of years, and it's just exploded. It's gone from generating there was Google's Deep Dream, which was quite a while ago now, and that made some mind-blowing images, and people had all these philosophical discussions around it, but that was nothing compared to what's possible now. And I think that is one of the points that is in favor, is that you just have this huge variety of applications that you can throw it to. It's not just a one-trick pony. I mean, you might have specific networks or code that runs, and you get certain things like an image or a video, but now there's some that are combining them in all kinds of crazy ways. And yeah, like I said, there are some skills involved in determining if something you make is like a nice and aesthetically pleasing work of art, but it is in reach for a lot more people now. So one of the things I wanted to, I guess the first one is the images. So we have these neural networks. Everyone's probably seen some of the stuff from this by now. So there's, I don't know, I've got a couple of subreddits. There's one specifically called AI Art, and there's just hundreds of posts every day of people just generating stuff, and they like it, so they want to share it with other people, and it's understandable. And there's like Midjourney, which has a Discord server you go to, and you type in the prompt, and it generates some images for you. Stable Diffusion is a really cool one because it's something that is possible to just run at home. You don't need to pay for access, and you don't need to pay for tokens and all this kind of thing. And they do the image generation in a variety of ways. Normally it's just a text to image thing, but a lot of them, including DALL-E and Stable Diffusion, you can give it an existing image and generate something new from that. Or you can mask out certain areas, say a house or a t-shirt or anything you want, and then that will stay and the rest gets regenerated. And DALL-E too is a bit more capable in that regards, because it can do things like moving elements of the image around or putting something brand new but keeping it all the same. So I don't know, I saw one of the examples on their website was a painting, and then they just inserted, I think it was like a pug or something in there. So then, but it fit the style, and so it was fully context aware, which, I mean, even from a human perspective, that's difficult. You can't imagine taking a classic painting and then adding something new in there like a pug, and then just making it fit perfectly with the rest of the image. So it is very impressive. And so I just thought I'd show a couple of examples of ones that I generated. This was DALL-E and DALL-E. Midjourney. I mean, they're really nice. Of course, I tend to like generating images that are more sort of dark and these sort of colors, but there's so many examples if you want to go and explore. And what seems to me to be a bit more complicated than just a still image, but using the same principles, is videos, because there's a lot going on. Things have to stay consistent from frame to frame in general. But the technology has just come a long way. I think this first little clip I want to show was from maybe 1 or 2 months ago, and it's a demonstration of Google's technology for taking a still image of a landscape or something like that, and then just turning it into a full interactive 3D environment that keeps generating as you go along. I don't know if I make it full screen, is it going to be full screen? Can I even do that? Okay, apparently I should have tested this. But it's okay.
Can see that these are also not perfect, but this kind of improvement, just one more paper down the line, is nothing short of amazing. Especially that it doesn't only have better quality. No, it can do even more. It offers...
I'll leave it at that, but
everyone can see
if you want to
also
look at it more, of course, I think the slides will be available, but yeah, I've got links to them all and that kind of thing. So it's basically just like creating the rest of the world. It has no idea what actually is behind the mountains or how far away they are. It does all these kind of mapping and then turns it into a completely interactive environment. And then in terms of like the more arty side of things, then you have like the music video from Diantwoord recently, which is just all AI generated art. And it looks really cool. I won't play very long because then I'll probably get copyright claimed on YouTube. So. But you can see they have all the different frames, and then they have the characters in there, like the actual parts of the band and stuff, and then like they have different representations of them in different styles, and it goes through all these. It's really cool. It's worth a look. And then also on the kind of other side, we have sounds as well. So there's different ways of generating things. You can do like text to speech, which has obviously been around for a long time, but the newer models now can actually imitate an existing voice or create voices in all kinds of different styles. There's one that I came across, which I also have a link in the slide, that it, with just, I think it was 3 samples, you can basically create a copy of anyone's voice. And that's something you can run on your own computer. So it's come a long way as well. All of these have just exploded recently. So yeah, there's different things as well. You can think of plenty of applications for this, for video games, for movies, just for interacting. I mean, even like real-time translation and things like that, where you could actually replicate someone's voice but in a different language. I mean, that would be amazing. So there's cool things like this. I wanted to show you an example from MuseNet, which is from OpenAI. This is actually a couple of years old now, but they have these 2 different models. One is the jukebox one, which they have, it generates actual audio, which includes like a singer and the instruments as like a complete composition. And I have a favorite example, but I couldn't find it. And it's one where they generated like a song by Frank Sinatra, and then he talks about wanting to eat human flesh for sacrifice, which you should be able to find on the internet somewhere, but it's on their SoundCloud. But the other one I wanted to show was, I think it was like Lady Gaga and then continued by the Beatles. So they have a prompt which is like, the cool thing about this is they use like a MIDI style model. So it's a virtual instrument, and in this case it doesn't sound amazing because they're just using a simple piano thing. But with the MIDI stuff, you can just run it through any kind of synthesizer you want and come up with all kinds of sounds. So this is like the prompt, it's kind of the intro, and then they say continue this as if you were the Beatles. So, of course, being just MIDI, it's not that great. Yeah, you can see the potential, right? Like if you want a new song in a certain style or genre, or even in the style of a certain artist, you can just do that. And then if you want to add the human element, you can just map it out to some chords and then play it on a real instrument as well. But then you have a new composition that no one's ever heard before. And the text thing, this is another thing that has been a lot in the media, especially with GPT-3. I mean, it's a massive, massive model that can just do all kinds of things to do with text and beyond. People have put crazy applications to it. Similar things are used for like Google for GitHub's Copilot, which can predict code. So you can just start typing a function in a file, and then it just writes out the rest for you. Press tab and it's done. I use it a lot. I don't remember how to program anymore. And there was this really cool thing called AI Dungeon, and I think I haven't played with it in a long time, but they crippled it apparently. But before, you could just go in and like a old school interactive text dungeon where you'd say, all right, go left, go right, go east, except it was just natural language. So then you'd set up a prompt and say, you're a space cowboy and you live on Mars and your mission is to get to Earth. And then it would just generate everything around that, and you'd start typing stuff like, I walk to my spaceship, and then all of a sudden it's like, some alien comes to try and kill you and you have to fight with it. But it's all like just natural language, and these characters, then you can talk to them and interact, and they have backstories and whatever. It was a really cool concept, and the application of GPT-3, which I really liked, it showed huge amounts of creativity and potential. And there's different ways in which these can be implemented, like the prompt continuation. So you start with something, few words, and then say, generate the rest for me, and then it can just keep going. I mean, I've used it as inspiration for talking about certain topics, and it works really well for that. You can't use it to generate a finished paper. It's not to that level yet. And conversation as well. That's like with the AI Dungeon, you can have like a two-way conversation, and this is where it's been implemented in things like chatbots and online assistants and all that kind of thing. And tools, people have used it to write code to make a web UI. You just say, make this kind of thing, and then it prints out some code, and quite often it actually works, which is very impressive. And I like video games, so I think it was something I wanted to talk about as well, but in part mainly because of this really cool thing I saw the other day, which was Grand Theft Auto. So it uses like a network, and they trained it on all this data from like just one bridge in GTA. They had cars driving up and down, and they trained the network on that, and then they could use this framework to then make a game out of it. And it's early days and early stages, so it's not amazing yet, but the concept is there, and it's going to get better. But you can imagine how cool it would be to be in any kind of virtual environment, but specifically in a video game, where the characters are actually ones you can interact with, and they won't just say the same lines of dialogue over and over again. And they can remember what you say, they have real personalities, they have connections to other characters. I mean, it would just make it feel a lot more immersive. I don't know if I put this video to start at the right timestamp. Oh, it doesn't matter. I'll just skip into some bit of it if I can. It's not going to let me. I think he starts talking.
Come here you, I've been working on a poem. Tell me what you think.
Okay, let's hear it. So he's using his microphone and then speech to text, and then
this world is so cool, I say is death and destruction, why can't we all just get along? I just want to go home.
So the voice synth model they used is not that great, but it's still a cool idea. Why does it not stop?
Welcome everybody to Grand Theft Auto.
You know what? I won't demo that, but again, it's one of these things I recommend seeing. I don't know why it doesn't let me make them full screen, but it's worth taking a look at as well. And like the reason that I think this is disruptive, maybe you've already come to some of these conclusions yourself, but I mean, for example, stock photo sites, they're huge. Lots of media outlets and stuff use them. Why would you ever want to go to a stock photo site to look for a bunch of happy people eating salad on around an office table when you can type that into a network and get it to generate it for you? And the combination of these concepts, I think that was, well, because of the video poorly demonstrated, but in that game where the guy is developing it, I mean, he's still very early, but he's releasing progress updates, and it's something I want to keep a keen eye on. But it does combine these things. It has this like generated speech that's just done on the fly. It does all of the things with GPT-3 about the characters' dialogues and prompting them to be a certain way. And yeah, you can think this is just like the beginning. You can make any combination you want to come up with some cool ideas. And yeah, it is going along really fast. I mean, that video about the Google fly-through picture thing, that has seen a couple of updates in the last, few months even, and the differences between them are astonishing. And I think this allows, like that guy and others, to create something with limited resources and limited access to the tools that, normally you have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for licensing, for music as well. I mean, all of those royalties are expensive. And yeah, of course, everyone wants to hear some like song that they love in some well-made production, but you can't afford that as a small developer, and to do all of that yourself is very, very difficult, not to mention time-consuming. And yes, definitely give these things a go at home. Stable Diffusion will run on any PC with like a GPU. Some it'll run on just the CPU, and like it runs on Macs and stuff as well. And this is an example of what the UI looks like. You literally just put a prompt in, you can mess around with the parameters, the size of the image, and then it comes out with something. And I think that's pretty awesome. And it's just easy to do. Some people have made just a one file that you download and you double click it and you run, and that's it. And some other way, like this one is a little bit more complicated to set up, but I think if you've used GitHub and you've opened up some code files and stuff before, then it should be able to be done without too much hassle. And I thought I would just quickly go through what's underneath all of these models, because they all use a similar idea in how they work. It's kind of based on the neural networks, which has this concept of replicating some idea of a human brain. So there's like different connected nodes and they talk to each other. Of course, it's a bit more complicated than that, but essentially that's what it is. And they're not complicated enough yet that one Google developer, he was like an ethics guy, but most people are not saying they have sentience or agency or anything like that just yet. But we'll see in the future. I think as it gets more complicated, it's going to be harder and harder to tell. And yeah, if you get an idea of how things work, then you can kind of probe at it and figure out what's going on and get a better idea of how to use it and where it's not going to work for you. So this is just generally like what neural networks look like if you try and depict them in a 2D way. But you have simply inputs, and at the end you come up with an output. That's all it is. And the input can be anything. Of course, it needs to be converted into something the computer can understand. So normally you turn an image into all of its associated pixels and colors and all of this kind of thing. And then all that middle bit is just do something. And each of these nodes has a different weight. So depending on what comes in, if it's simply a green pixel goes in here, then it's like, oh, I've seen this before, the green one, okay, then I should go here. And then it might forward on to somewhere else or not. This is a densely connected network, so all of these nodes are connected to each other. But there's many different styles. And this was just an example of like a convolutional network where you take things out and you transform them. And essentially what you try and do in the case of audio or pictures or anything like that is you want to find the key components that actually matter to what you want to use. And in the case of the categorization, like of a dog and a cat, then it might turn out there's only 3 pixels you need to say that this is a dog. And that's what you should be able to keep if everything was perfectly optimized. It's usually not that optimized. And the networks, so you have these neural networks, and then they need to be trained. But this is something that takes a lot of time and a lot of money, and it can have a big environmental impact because these are running in massive data centers with GPUs drawing huge amounts of power. This is just like an illustration of how many, like, this is training petaflops seconds per or days, and it's just insane how much data needs to be passed through these networks to train them properly, because each of those like dots in the network, they are like, you have values assigned to them, they're the parameters, and they get tweaked as you put new inputs into them, and then it gets updated each time you train it on something new. And then you also have this idea of adversarial networks, essentially neural network that monitors another neural network. So then you have an output, and if you say this is a dog, the other network has data in it that already knows whether it's a dog or a cat, and then it can come back to it and say, no, you got that wrong. And then the underlying model will update its weights and say, okay, now I know that this is wrong, and then it keeps doing that. So there's like back and forth between the two networks, and that's how you get even more precise and fine-grained results. And of course, to train them, you need huge sets of data. This can be very like intensive to generate them. Now there's tons of publicly available ones that are open source as well, but they require at least some kind of concept mapping or labeling of the data, because otherwise how do you know what you're generating is what you expect it to be? So you have to have some kind of source of truth to say, all right, this is what I want. I mean, there's other techniques as well, like you can have things that like are self-learning and whatever, but you still need to have some kind of goals and things that it goes for. And especially with this art stuff, they are trained on, like, I mean, the GPT-3, 500 billion tokens. So that's things from Wikipedia, web scraping, scans of books, all kinds of things that it was trained on to know how language is constructed. And DALL-E as well, 400 million image pairs that have the text associated with them with a description of what is inside that image or what concepts are mapped to that image. And the networks themselves are huge as well. I mean, 175 billion parameters. I mean, we have 86 billion neurons around that in the brain. So in some aspects, it may be more complex than what our the neurons in our brain are. Of course, it's not in other ways, but these networks are very specifically trained for a single task, and there's no way we could recount details about like hundreds of millions of images from, you know, if you were trying to recite all of the artists you knew and all the pictures you'd ever seen, you'd run out pretty quickly. And it seems to be that there is this trend of the model's complexity going up and up and up. And I'm sure Espen may talk about this a little bit anyway, but there's this idea that some tasks will get better and other tasks may actually get worse with the size of the model. So there is work being done in both directions, because at the moment with the current hardware, these larger models, there's no way anyone reasonable can run them at home, let alone like, you know, on a laptop or something. But you need big data centers with lots of GPUs. It's difficult, complex, and generally expensive. But of course, hardware gets better. Maybe it gets cheaper to run them. But there's a lot of effort put into sparsity, which is basically just not having everything connected to everything else, rather just what needs to be connected. and then you can train the models in this way as well. And pruning, like just removing things that are unneeded, and compression as well, which is kind of like all these concepts together where you're just trying to get rid of unneeded data to make the models smaller and to fit into less hardware and memory. So yeah, I think the creativity side of it is really interesting, because if you can come up with something to write, or even if you don't, you could write, I don't know what to write, and then you will get something. So as a well for inspiration, it's almost limitless. I mean, I've used it so much for this kind of thing because I like creating stuff. Sometimes it's hard to come up with an idea, and even if what I end up doing is nothing like what came out, it's still acted as kind of like a source of inspiration. And one thing I like to do with these, especially the image models, is have like a concrete concept that I try and develop. I'm not going to go too much into the backstory of this, but I have this like idea of this like nightmarish train made out of flesh, and it should be like a pretty disturbing image. But a lot of these models, they don't really let you do that because I got banned from a couple of them. So. But in general, like if you have a kind of concrete idea, then you can play around with what you put in to see what it takes to get what you want out. Rather than, I mean, of course you can just say, oh, beautiful picture of the galaxy or something, and it'll do that. But if you have something in mind, then it's a cool way to explore it and be like, oh, what do I need to do to get the results that I'm looking for? And that differs from model to model, of course. So these were just like some of the examples that I came up with using Stable Diffusion. And like some of them are pretty cool, I gotta say. And there's, I mean, just you can imagine in any kind of situation, commercial applications, like for artists, but also for like designers, developers, anything like that. There's plenty of ways you can just apply this. I mean, there's people that have made like plugins for 3D software. There's people that have made plugins for Photoshop, for all of this kind of stuff. So you can mix these different medias and use the networks to do something cool with it. Also, I've seen people posting like fashion photos that they generated with AI, or people showing themselves in like 50 different AI generated outfits. So again, it's inspiration for almost any field available here. So this is, I got my son to draw me a couple of things. So he drew a house for me, and then I put it into Stable Diffusion, and I didn't really do much in terms of like tweaking things. I just said the text associated with this was a house on a hillside, and I've got a nice couple of examples of what it put out. So the thing is, to kind of understand, and going back to the way the neural networks work, this image, of course, is mostly white. And you know, if you're starting with this, then you're going to imagine that it's going to trigger a lot of things that are associated with white. So quite often you might actually just get another drawing out, but maybe it's a bit more stylized or something like that. If you add specific keywords like oil painting or watercolor or something like that, then it's more likely to generate something with more colors. Or you can just, like I said before, you can mask certain parts and keep things and just change the rest. So that is something that it just generated, and another one, it's like pretty nice. And yeah, it's definitely a fleshed out concept from the original sketch. And yeah, I think I've highlighted some of these real world applications already. Yeah. No worries. Yeah, but like you imagine, rapid prototyping is a good way to do this. If you have an idea, sometimes just the effort of opening up the software, interacting with it, can take quite a long time. Instead, you can just sketch out a concept and then have something that's more concrete that you can then work with and expand upon. Same thing with like user experience and design. You can apply it to all of these things. And as we saw with the games, you know, the interactions that can be simulated are incredible. And I think this is like a double-edged sword because, you know, with things like meta on the horizon and all that stuff, you know, who knows where this is going to go. And you can imagine not knowing who's a real person and who's not at some point. And yeah, so there are risks, of course, and people are able to be fooled by things that are generated, as we've seen with the competition, but also with interactions. I have a video on the next slide that demonstrated it, but I'm not going to show it for reasons that have become clear. But yeah, you can think also with fake news and things like that. I mean, already there's a lot of misinformation out there, and this can make it sound even better because a lot of people may be able to just generate something and say, give me convincing arguments for why climate change is a hoax, and then they get all this stuff, and then they can also tweak it if they want to. And yeah, this stuff's already on the internet. There's bots everywhere that use language models that generate text on Twitter, Reddit, whatever else, and they are often designed with a particular policy or agenda in mind, that they want to push something or another. So it is something to be aware of. And yeah, so this was the video I wanted to show you, but I will just quickly explain it. He made a model that was trained on 4chan's poll board, and those interactions are interesting to say the least. But the cool thing was, like, he just let this bot go wild on there and start interacting with people and replying, and it wasn't very sophisticated. Like, it's obviously, you know, something that wouldn't have been able to be done 20 years ago, let alone like even earlier, but it's still fairly simple. And yet people were fooled by this, and they thought that they were real people, and they started a whole conspiracy about it. They were like, oh, this must be like the government or the CIA. And then he released a bunch of bots, and then, of course, because there's multiple, they're posting at the same time, and that just, even after he posted on there that, hey, I'm the creator of these bots, this is what was going on, the conspiracies continued. So, you know, it's just that easy. And something even maybe more concerning potentially is that you can fake anything. I mean, you can make a fake nude selfie, like in this case here. And of course, combining that with the other things like masking or whatever, there's a lot of potential for harm in terms of like people's reputations, or putting people in situations that never occurred. It doesn't have to be a naked selfie. It could be like literally anything that someone shouldn't be doing, or at least according to their societal like norms and whatever. And also with public figures and that kind of thing. I think most of you may have seen that one with the fake Barack Obama video. Like, it's getting better and better. I mean, already that was pretty good, but it'll get even better in terms of like full-on deep fakes of people's mannerisms, their speech, their actual appearance, everything. So, like, it's kind of hard to figure out, you know, what's real and what's not, and I think that is something that is going to get worse. And yes, Esben hopefully will touch on some of this stuff, but there is a lot of research in AI safety and ethics and all this kind of thing, and it's really important field because there are so many implications to all this technology that I think we just need to spend time and effort into it to find tools, make tools that can discriminate which things are real and not, or teach people how to interact with these AIs, also teaching them how to discern real information from fake. And that's not an easy task, so, you know, props to you for like wanting to dedicate yourself to that. And yeah, I mean, there's tons of pressure from businesses and things to get things delivered quickly, and I think that's where we'll see more and more AI generated articles. I've seen reports of like editors or like columnists or whatever using GPT-3 and other tools to just generate text based on a news article. Say, this thing happened recently in this place at this time, and then it'll generate some content, and they might edit it, but let's face it, if you're on massive time pressure, you're probably going to be doing very minimal editing. So all kinds of factual errors could just slip into there, especially if it's about recent events that the AI has no knowledge of. So this will just keep getting used more and more. And yeah, is this going to change the world? Well, I think it's got the potential to do so, but like anything, we'll see. It could fizzle out because there'll be other things that are more pressing, other existential risks that we have to deal with that put all this stuff aside. But it may be that we'll then just throw all those problems to an AI instead, so we'll see. There's like massive risks, but there's also really cool things and potential and inspiration that can be drawn from all of this. And yeah, I think definitely give these things a try and just like have fun with them and explore. So yeah, that's it. I put some further resources and whatever and some references. So yeah, the slides will be available after.
Well, thank you, Luke. I think we're gonna take a little break. Maybe we can get some fresh air in here. If you wanna grab a coffee and you don't want to pay for milk, we've got milk here. As I can see, no one made it into butter. We should probably get a toast up and running for the second.
We're not gonna make questions.
Oh yes, of course. That yes, absolutely. Actually, my bad. Thank you, friend.
Yeah. If you have questions, you're more than welcome to ask them. I'm not sure I can give you a good answer, but I'll try.
Since it's so easy to generate new images that didn't exist before, I was wondering if you have thought about, in my own perception has changed about how valuable an image is. It's like now it's more like just one more out of anything, and you can just simply maybe imagine. As soon as you're able to imagine it in your head, you can make it happen in front of you, right?
Yeah.
But I was wondering if we are limiting also humans, because then the art that we've made so far, it kind of if finally everything is interpolation, are we not like kind of overfitting the model that is like art, or like humans generating art? And is there any way to mitigate that? To kind of maybe increase the temperature and go out like can this not to interpolate but to create new things?
Yeah, I think so. Also, just from a pure AI perspective, of course, you can always introduce some kind of randomness in there or some kind of noise. It doesn't mean that the images and videos and whatever that come out are aesthetically pleasing, but that is technically something new. And it is all based on existing stuff, but the combinations that come out are probably things that have never occurred before. So any image you generate is technically something new. But there's also no reason that you can't, as a human, get one of these images and then do something on top of it. And then you've created another way of like mixing media that is potentially new and interesting and engaging. I guess I don't feel like we've tapped the bottom of the well of art and potential yet. I think there's still plenty of room for exploration. And this is a tool that can be used to broaden that a little bit. But then again, you can also take all these new images that are being generated and the ways that people have combined them with other things and then feed it back into the neural networks and get something, again, that adds that to it. So, yeah, there's no reason that you have to stop training it after 2022, so we can keep going. Yep.
Could it be, maybe there could be like a similarity between the technology for a photograph and realism? So you know how that killed the realism?
They talked about that when you were there.
Yeah. Oh no, but there absolutely is parallels there, and there are concerns, and it is legitimate. Things will go by the wayside. The portrait painters are generally out of business because of photography, but there are still people that want a portrait painting done of them. It's just not the same market that it was before. And I did put in the more information, a link to a video called it's been around for quite a while now, but I haven't watched it in the last year or so I don't know how well it still applies, but I think it's pretty relevant. It's called Humans Need Not Apply, and it just talks about how it uses the history of horses as an illustration of how AI may or may not replace humans. And I think it's a really good analogy because, we still have horses around. They haven't all died off. And there are some jobs for horses, but the jobs have changed from what they were previously, where everyone had a horse to ride around or a carriage or whatever. So I think the same thing occurs. Maybe there'll be less jobs for a photographer or a stock photo producer or whatever, but then there'll be other opportunities for people to use. So.
All right. So it's 9